I thank the honourable guests for their speech, and I now look to Peter Tatchell to continue the opposition case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a great honour to join you here, I think, for my 30th Oxford Union debate over the last 3.5 decades. I'm very glad that you've taken the gracious decision to invite me back after the trouble I've sometimes caused in the past. I have to say that I agree with many of the sentiments and motivations of the proposers of this motion. They very rightly want to protect the weak and the vulnerable. That's a good thing. But I have a problem with how that is to be achieved and what its particular implications and costs might be in terms of open debate. So we've heard that a definition of a safe space is to make that space free from aggression, abuse, and intimidation. Now, of course, that sounds fine in principle, but each of those points, aggression, abuse, and intimidation, are down to very subjective interpretation. So what I may think is a perfectly reasonable point of view, others may think of as being aggressive or intimidatory or even abusive. So, for example, there are some people of religious faith in this country who regard people of other faiths or minority sects within certain faiths as beyond the pale. So, for example, many Shia and Sunni Muslims regard Ahmadi Muslims as apostates, and they would regard their views as profoundly shocking and that they should not be given the light of day. And indeed, using very similar arguments, many attempts by Ahmadi Muslims to have their voices heard have been closed down in this country, not a decade or a century ago, but even in the last couple of years. So I think the definition you provide is highly problematic. I think also of the example of Imogen Wilson at Edinburgh University. She was in a debate where there was a safe space. She says that some people in the debate made false allegations against her. And she raised her hand in disagreement and was told that violated the university's safe space policy. And indeed, it was put to a vote that she should be expelled from the meeting for having raised her hand in objection. Very fortunately, a narrow majority voted that she should be allowed to remain and continue. But a bit further later on in the debate, further false allegations against her were made, and she shook her head in disagreement, and there was another attempt to get her removed because she was said to be violating the safe space policy. So the problem is, a lot of it is down to interpretation. The principles and ideals behind the safe space policy may be in principle good, but in reality, sometimes the way they're interpreted is in fact quite authoritarian. Now, I'm saying that someone has a right to express a disagreeable opinion, but that is not the same as agreeing to their opinion or allowing that opinion to pass unchallenged.
A lot of rules and regulations in laws, in universities, in schools are subjective, and they could be misused by authoritarianism and authoritarian leaders. So by your argument, would you not also oppose in general living in an anarchic state, because laws could be misused and misapplied and misinterpreted to cause injustice? But that doesn't prove that laws themselves ought not exist. So how would you respond to that claim?
Well, I think there are two different things here. You're talking about laws, we're talking about rules agreed within the framework of law. And I think that the big danger with the no safe space policy and its allied no platform policy is that sometimes can be applied in ways that do diminish freedom of speech, and in particular, freedom for minority, disagreeable, dissenting opinions. What we're saying is that we want to defend the basic fundamental democratic principle that all ideas should be open to scrutiny and critique, that no ideas should be off limit, but certainly we do not want to encourage abuse, intimidation, and allied bad behavior, bad manners, because we do recognize that is not desirable. But again, the issue is, how do you interpret that? So many people will say, well, why should we have to debate bigots? Well, no one's saying you have to debate them, but I think overall, debating bigots is the most effective way to deal with them and debunk them. So I look at, for example, the appearance of Nick Griffin on BBC's Question Time. Many people felt that he should not be given a platform. I think it turned out to be the best thing that they ever decided, in the sense that Bonnie Greer and other panelists were able to take down Nick Griffin, and he emerged from that show weakened as an individual, and the BNP itself also damaged. The big important thing we have to bear in mind is that when you put a bigoted opinion, sometimes a very offensive opinion, in the public domain, you subject it to scrutiny, to critique. When you debunk it and counter it, usually you win. And usually those ideas are diminished. Whereas if you have a no platform or no safe space policy, often what happens is the ideas are not heard, they're still held, but they're not heard, and the end result is that they remain. We want to achieve a situation whereby those ideas can be fully scrutinized and fully critiqued in order to undermine them. Back in the 1970s, I was involved in championing, with others, the campaign for LGBTI rights. I made the point of going at every TV and radio program to which I was invited to debate every vile bigot there was, because I didn't like doing it, but I knew that was the way to defeat those arguments. I wasn't going on to debate the person per se, because I didn't think that many of them were persuadable. I was going on those programs in order to reach the audience, the members of the public, many of whom held similar bigoted ideas. And in the process, over the decades, that is how we changed public opinion in this country on LGBTI issues. It was through open, frank, and full debate. When it comes to safe spaces, it's a two-way thing. I say, no safe spaces for the fascist far right, for Jew haters, for Islamist misogynists, for Christian fundamentalists. I don't believe they should have the protection of safe spaces, because they are given by a safe space a get out. They can claim their safe space and put themselves beyond critique and challenge. We need to make sure those ideas are exposed. Freedom of speech is probably the most important and valuable of all human rights. It's been fought for long and hard. Many people did, when they began their ideas, their controversial ideas, people like Galileo Galilei, Charles Darwin, Mary Wollstonecraft, Karl Marx, and many others, they all caused profound offense in their day. If there'd been a safe space policy in place in those days, the majority would have used that policy, or could have used that policy, to silence them. I think it's good that dissenting ideas are open to scrutiny and challenge. Of course, this doesn't mean that those ideas should be given a free pass. You know, if you have a safe space policy, it excludes hearing about these ideas. If you have an open debate, those ideas can be subjected to analysis, to rigorous critique, to counter-evidence, and the end result is, for the most part, those ideas get debunked and defeated. I would not say that the safe space policy should be dumped. It's just that I don't agree with the motion which says this House believes a university must be a safe space. Not that safe spaces should exist within a university, but that the whole university should be a safe space. That is a step far, far too wide. I think that there are legitimate circumstances where safe spaces can be justified. So I don't think it's right in any debate that somebody makes false, damaging allegations against another person, accusing them of being a rapist or a tax fraudster, for example. I don't think it's legitimate when people engage in threats, harassment, or the endorsement of violence. You know, that is not free speech. That is an abuse of free speech. I agree with the proposition at that one level. But what we've often seen, too often we've seen, is that sometimes these policies are abused. So, for example, at Warwick University Student Union, they initially banned the Iranian communist and feminist Maryam Namazi from speaking to the atheist, secularist and humanist society, citing safe space and no platform policies. Likewise, soon afterwards at Goldsmiths College, the Islamic Society tried, but thankfully failed, to invoke the safe space policy to cancel Maryam Namazi's talk, claiming falsely that she was anti-Muslim. So we really do need to get things right. And I think, on balance, we need to err on the side of free and open debate, which is the hallmark of a free society. Thank you.